Good afternoon and welcome to the Brazos River Authority's Brown Bag on the Brazos. I'm Judy Pierce, Public Information Officer for the Brazos River Authority and your host for today's virtual town hall meeting. We have a really interesting program for you today. We're going to talk fishing with David Collinsworth, our BRA General Manager and CEO. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can get a free life jacket for your child or grandchild at an event coming up at Lake Granbury. Then we'll talk a little bit about the water cycle. I don't know about y'all, but I know some of us have forgotten what we learned back in the 4th and 5th grade, and it really makes a big difference in understanding what's going on with lake levels and stream flow. And then we'll finally get to weather and water supply, as we always do with each one of our events. And we'll talk questions and answers at the end if we have time. So before we jump in, let's talk a little bit about housekeeping. Like I said, you can ask questions during these events. The whole purpose is to be able to ask questions, or if you are interested in learning a little bit more about a topic, you could send us an email at information@brazos.org. But if you're interested in sending a question during our event, if you'll take a look at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see that little icon that's outlined in red. And you can just type in your question and we'll try to answer that before the end of our presentation today. So it's my pleasure to welcome David Collinsworth, our GM CEO. And what I'd like to bring to everyone's attention is that David is a longtime BRA employee. So before he became General Manager CEO in 2018, he had already been at the BRA for more than 20 years. And he did just about everything that you could do here before rising to the top position. So he knew water way before he started working at the BRA because he is an avid fisherman. So today we'd like to talk a little bit about fishing with our GM. So tell us about your background with fishing.
So Judy, I feel like I've reached the pinnacle of my career because I'm sitting here and I get to talk about fishing. And that was really what I wanted to go to college to be able to do. But unfortunately, when I went to college, they didn't have college fishing teams. Before I do that, let me just say this. I know that you and your staff spend a tremendous amount of time working on brown bag, working on other sources of education for folks through social media. And I just want to tell you that I think you and your staff do an outstanding job of getting the truths out, all of the information about what the BRA does and how we operate, and really helps us be first class. So thank you to you and your staff for organizing.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So fishing is just something that I grew up doing. It was a way that my dad and I spent time together. It was a way that my grandfather and I spent time together. And it is still a passion of mine. And there are times that my wife will look at me and she'll say, hey, job stress is too much. Go out to the boat and just lean against it and think about fishing. And it's just my happy place where I can go and really get away from anything that's stressful. So it's just something I've done my entire life.
That's great. Well, tell us about this fish in this picture.
So this fish was a fish kind of like the story I just told you. My wife said, hey, you're stressed out. It was a week after Ice Storm Uri, and the water was still down in the 30s. And I got to go out and spend an afternoon on Lake Whitney, and that's my personal best largemouth bass. It weighed 10.4 pounds.
Beautiful.
And luckily, I had a friend on the lake that I could call to come take a photo of it, or I would have. I don't know what I would have done, but I'm glad that I captured that moment.
It's a beautiful fish.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. So, you know, the Brazos River Basin is huge. We have 11 reservoirs. I'm going to go to this map here so that we can kind of show people what we're talking about. And I'm assuming just because the basin is so diverse from west to east, that fishing is going to be different. So I'm sure that you've probably fished in every one of these areas.
I have.
So tell us where the good fishing is. I'm not going to ask you to give us your.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, as a fisherman, I would lie to you anyway. So let's be clear. First of all, just as you mentioned, because of the diversity of the basin, we have a lot of fishing opportunities, but we also have a lot of fishing opportunities because Texas Parks and Wildlife is such an outstanding organization when it comes to managing our fisheries, stocking programs, habitat programs, through the Lone Star Lunker program that all of these you can research on their webpage. But they do an outstanding job of providing a resource for fishermen. The upper parts of the basin near Possum Kingdom are very different than the lower parts of the basin. The river is very different. The reservoirs are very different. Possum Kingdom is known for its largemouth bass and its stripers. Lake Granbury is known for largemouth bass and catfish and sand bass and crappie. And then Lake Limestone, in my opinion, probably scores out as one of the best crappie lakes in Texas, if not the whole southern region of the United States. And all of those reservoirs are just really wonderful fisheries. And then when you get to the west side of I-35, the hill country reservoirs like Lake Whitney and Lake Granbury, like Georgetown and Steelhouse and Belton provide a lot of opportunities for striped bass, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, and just a whole different gamma of game fish that folks can fish for year round. And, you know, our winters are mild enough that winter fishing can be really excellent along the Brazos and in its reservoirs. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity for anglers in Central Texas and along the Brazos.
Okay. Well, I know you're a boat guy.
Yep.
But do you ever fish on the rivers as well?
So I do. I fish on the Brazos. There's the only challenge with fishing on the Brazos is just accessibility. But there is accessibility downstream of PK and downstream of Whitney. There's a really nice boat ramp just to the west side of Marlin, and the Brazos, when the water is right and you can get out and fish, provides wonderful fishing opportunities. Upstream, again, it's more of a largemouth bass, striped bass, and then when you get south of Waco, the river becomes a little bit different, and it's more of a catfishing opportunity or alligator gar opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunities.
I was wondering about that
Yep.
because we get a lot of calls on two different types of fish.
Okay.
So first of all, I'd like to mention, I don't know if these are correct that we have up there, but those are the ones that we get a lot of calls about, the
Okay.
types of fish. So is there anything that we didn't mention in there that people could look for?
No, I think that really covers the more popular fish. Fishing in the Brazos, fishing in Texas is a multi-billion-dollar a year, influence to the economy. But those are the ones that I think maybe the only thing that you're missing is maybe striped bass out of the reservoirs, both Whitney and Possum Kingdom.
Okay. Well, one of the fish that we get a lot of calls about, starting in around Thanksgiving, I think, is that Parks and Wildlife goes out and puts rainbow trout out, and that seems to be a very popular type of fishing. So what's so important about rainbow trout?
Well, it just provides another type of fishing opportunity. It is a fish that is not endemic to Texas, so Parks and Wildlife brings it in. It's a cold water fish, so it can only live throughout most of Texas during the wintertime. So they bring them in and they stock them in parts of the Brazos, parts of the Guadalupe watershed, and it's another opportunity. The other great thing about rainbow trout is that they can take them and stock them in small city parks that have small ponds and water bodies to provide an education for kids to learn how to fish. And during that time of the year, the rainbow trout are pretty hungry, so they're pretty easy to catch, and they're wonderful table fare also. So it provides a good opportunity. Yeah, and that's typically, most of those fish are stocked in November and December. You can figure all that out on Texas Parks and Wildlife's homepage, and I think they require a rainbow trout stamp if you're going to fish for rainbow trout.
Okay, good to know. The other one that we get a lot of calls about, and this is mostly on the rivers, I don't know if they're so much on lakes, but alligator gar.
So alligator gar, you'll find them from time to time in reservoirs, but they're mostly river dwellers. And both the Sabine Trinity, and the Brazos have some very unique characteristics that allow alligator gar to become ginormous. And they're really a unique breed of fish. They're almost dinosaur in their nature and their age. And there's a lot of guides and a lot of people spend a lot of time catching alligator gar. The only thing that I would warn you about alligator gar is there's some certain requirements and laws and rules about how you can catch them and how you can keep them, and you need to be up to date on those.
Be aware of that
Be
before you
aware
head
of
out.
that before you go catch a monster.
Okay,
Right.
awesome. All right, well, if there is one thing about fishing that you'd like to leave with everybody, a suggestion, a tip, what's the best place to go?
Yeah, so my advice would be two things. I'll break the rules. One is when you're going out to fish, always be aware of the weather and understand what Mother Nature is going to deal you on that day. And then two is take a kid fishing. And it's very important for this industry to continue to educate and provide opportunities for our youth, because those are the folks that are going to continue to carry this forward. So that would be my two pieces of advice.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Absolutely. This is fun.
Appreciate it. It's fun to
Absolutely.
talk fishing, something different, not just water.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we will move on to our next speaker, and thank you, David. So our next speaker is Kyle Lewis. Very pleased to have him back again this year. Kyle is our Assistant Reservoir Manager for Lake Granbury, and he's here to talk to us a little bit about how you can get a free life jacket for your child or your grandchild at an event coming up in May. So Kyle, tell us about what's going on in May at Lake Granbury.
Water Safety Awareness Day.
Awesome.
It's an event we started back in 2016. We've tried different dates. We usually try to have it around the first weekend in May. We've moved it this year a couple of weeks, a little bit later, to kind of help start off the start of State Boating Week. State Boating Week starts on, I think, May the 17th.
It does, yeah.
So we're going to start off the week before Memorial Day. We're going to have a big old party at Rough Creek Park on Lake Granbury.
Awesome, great. And tell us about what's going to happen there that day.
What we're going to do is we're going to have all kind of participants, guests that will come out, and we're going to talk everything safety, from water safety, water conservation, water recreation. We have folks coming out talk kayak safety. We have our lake rangers will be there talking boating safety. We'll have our fire departments, our first responders will be there. They'll have fire boats on the water. They'll have police boats on the water.
So the kids will be able to see these up close and personal.
Kids will be able to
Get
see
on
these,
that fire
climb on
boat.
them, climb on a fire truck, see what all their equipment is. Have folks there talking about scuba diving.
Great.
We're going to have kid fish, as Mr. Collinsworth just said. Take a kid fishing. This is your chance. You can fish for free. We're going to have rod and reels provided. We're going to have bait provided. We're going to have volunteers there to kind of help kids.
So they don't have to have any experience in fishing.
Correct. We have people there that will help them from bait their hook, learn how to cast, and probably catch fish, because almost everybody that fishes our kid fish will catch fish.
That's wonderful. And there's a prize if they catch
There's
something.
a prize. We're going to give away some Zepco rod and reels. We're going to give away probably 4 or 5 an hour. We're going to give away gift cards to Raising Cane, one of our big supporters of this event the last couple of years. So Cane's has stepped up again. They're going to help us with some prizes as well. So
awesome.
But come out and, just like I say, it's just a good chance to get out and spend a day in the park.
Okay, but I think the centerpiece of this event for us is these life jackets that we're going to be providing to the community. So tell me about the life jackets.
The main goal of Water Safety Day is we want to get as many kids in a brand new life jacket before we start the summer season. It is so crucial to make sure that a life jacket a child has is the right size, the right fit. Make sure they understand how to put it on. Make sure, a lot of parents are join us are boaters. A lot of may be going to even a swim. A life jacket to me is just important as the seatbelts in a car. If you're around the water, if you're kids and they need the right size, they need one that's in good shape. So we have 300 brand new life jackets that we're going to give away. The kiddos that day. We're going to help you size it, make sure it's the right fit.
Right. We have staff that are trained to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so that's the main goal of Water Safety. We're going to give away as many as we can to kids, and so we'll have everybody gets a fresh start on a safe summer.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, let's take a little bit more a look at what we've got going on there. Tell us about some of the other people that are participating in the event.
Second part of Water Day, like I say, life jackets are crucial and number one. Second thing we're going to do is, the last several years, we've had a blood drive. We teamed up with Carter Blood Care again. They're going to come out and have a blood drive during the Water Day event. So as important as a life jacket is to a child, donating blood is so crucial, especially starting off the summer season, right for holiday weekend. A donation of 1 pound of blood may help save up to 3 people. You may affect 3 people's lives. So we'll have stuff on the website. I've got to echo what Mr. Collinsworth just said. You and your team, y'all did an excellent job promoting this event and other events and activities around the lake. So we appreciate all of y'all's hard work, and he couldn't have said it better, but y'all are so great with this. But we'll be putting information, or y'all will be putting information out for us over the next few weeks leading up to Water Day to promote to what we have as far as the blood drive and the life jackets and things like that. But
okay, and it's kind of a big party because we're going to have live music that we'll have
Yes.
a radio station broadcasting
K-Hits
live.
Radio, 95.5 radio station out of Granbury. They've joined us since, I think, the second event, and they've been there every year. They'll be broadcasting all day through the park. They'll have their DJ on-air personalities will be out there doing broadcasts and talking to different folks.
Great.
Like I said, we can have a lot of things. We're gonna have hot dogs. We're gonna feed you. Bring your kids up. We're gonna feed your kids. We got hot dogs. We're gonna feed everybody hot dogs that are donated by Accent Rock. We've got, I mean, there's so many people that are coming together to talk water safety. Upper Trinity Groundwater District, they're bringing their water education trailer again. Radiant Swim School, the YMCA, they're gonna be there talking about swim safety. Cook Children's Hospital will join it. They'll be talking to our Center for Children's Health. They're coming out again this year. The Master Naturalists, Dinosaur Valley State Park, those folks are always great. They're coming out and join us. All of our local fire departments, almost all of them there.
That's
Supporting
exciting.
us. So we just got a whole list of, we got a snake expert coming out again.
We have somebody that's coming out to talk about the Brazos River water
He's gonna
snake.
talk about all kinds of snakes.
And lots of things for people to look at, the kids to
Lots of
see
things for
and
kids to
do.
do. And I mean, something to have fun and to learn. I mean, you're gonna accidentally learn something you don't realize it. So lots of community support for Granbury and Hood County surrounding areas. So we just want y'all to come out and see what all the commotion's about. Like I say, it's gonna be a fun day.
Okay, so tell us the days and times again,
May the 17th. It is at Rough Creek Park,
right? Right.
2209 South Morgan.
Mhm.
For me, a lot of people around Granbury might know it's the park right behind Stumpy's.
Right.
And so we'll be there from 9 to 1. The blood drive will be going from 9 to 1. So just come out and see us and let's see what all the commotion's about. Bring your kid fishing. Let's go fishing and we'll have a lot of fun out there that day.
It's a good intro to fishing.
It sure is.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle,
You
for
bet.
coming
Thank you
out and
for having
telling
us
us
out.
about it. And we hope to see everybody to come on out and have your kids learn to fish. Like they said, there's going to be free hot dogs, live music, and a DJ. And we're celebrating that same day. Armed Forces Day is that day. So we're also celebrating our local heroes. All right. So our next guest is Peyton Lysenby. He's our senior water resources planner. And I asked Peyton to come on out and talk to us a little bit about the water cycle. He's going to give us a little bit of a primer on how the water cycle works, mainly because we have so many people ask, hey, the lake is down. What's up with that? They don't realize that these are water supply lakes. They're filled up by having rainfall, but they're also affected not only by water supply, but by evaporation. And so we'd like to just remind everybody about how this whole system works and why we see lake levels going up and down over the summer. So Peyton, tell us what we need to know here.
So, I mean, what you're seeing here is a pretty average depiction of the water cycle that we're all familiarized with at a fairly early age. At its most fundamental level, this cycle that water moves through our environment is driven by two things. Heat, and what you see on the right side of the diagram here is things that end up lifting water up into the atmosphere, and that's driven by heat, primarily evaporation and transpiration. We'll talk more about those in a minute. And then on the flip side, when you get enough water in the atmosphere and atmospheric conditions that are conducive to rainfall, you end up having gravity drive that in. So the precipitation either is liquid or is frozen, falls back down, and the whole cycle repeats itself.
Okay, so we're moving from right to left.
Yeah, and this obviously is very simplified.
Right.
What I want to point out is, although the graph depicts it as occurring all the time in the same way, seasonality, as our seasons change throughout the year, it greatly affects the timing and magnitude of each one of these components of the water cycle. And as we're now moving, from winter, we're in spring now, and we move into the summer, we're going to start seeing greater magnitudes of evaporation and transpiration. We're going to talk more about how that plays a role in how we manage our water supply system and the things we look for in our water supply system.
Okay.
So I think, can I just do that? What we're going to start with is a lot of this comes down to lakes and soils. Especially my focus as a water resource planner is looking at ways in which our water supply system can be replenished, can be refilled. And it's not just about raining on our lakes. We need that water to flow through the basin to our reservoirs. And you'll notice here on the left side, as it rains, it's raining on the landscape. The water then has to run off that landscape in order to reach our rivers, in order to flow into our reservoirs. And so soils, the soils that cover our landscape, this blanket of highly fertile material that plants can grow in, plays a major part in determining how much runoff is generated from a given precipitation event. So when it comes to moving into warmer time periods, we start seeing obviously temperatures rise in the spring, especially this part in central Texas. It's not uncommon for spring to, temperatures move into the 80s, into the 90s. We'll be into 100-degree temperatures as we move into the summer. And that has a very pronounced effect on evaporation simply by controlling how much water vapor the air can hold. So the image on the right here is just kind of a basic depiction of as air warms, its capacity to hold moisture increases. And that's why we express humidity in terms of a comparison between how much water vapor is in the air versus how much water vapor the air can actually hold. And that's why it's a relative number. That's why it's called relative humidity. Okay. You have to relate those two variables to one another to get an accurate depiction. So here we have this bubble on the left here. This is supposed to represent warmer air having a greater capacity to hold water. Mm-hmm. And so the same amount of water, notice the blue droplet of water is the same size in these three images. The same amount of water in warmer air has less relative humidity because the air is capable of holding much more water. As the air cools, its capacity to hold moisture is reduced. And so cooler air can hold less water, so that same amount of water as before now represents 100% relative humidity. Okay. It's the same reason that when you have a cold, not this, but when you have an uninsulated cup of an iced beverage in there, you get water condensing on the side of it, right? And that's because the air around your cup is much colder because it's right next to an iced beverage. Mm-hmm. So the capacity for that air to hold water is much less. So the moisture in the air has to precipitate out, has to condense out in response to that change in temperature. So when it comes to lake evaporation, as we move into the spring and into the summer, what we find is the air above our reservoirs gets warmer. So the air above our reservoirs has a greater capacity to hold moisture. But that's not the only important component. If you can imagine a situation where we have completely still conditions, no wind, not a puff of breeze, it is dead still. The air above our reservoirs is warm, you would get some evaporation. Right. However, the water that evaporates, that turns into water vapor, wouldn't really have a reason to move away from that surface, the layer of air just above the reservoir. We call that the vapor blanket, right? Because it's this layer of air just above our reservoirs that gets kind of saturated with water vapor if there's no component of the weather condition to move that air around. So wind, aside from temperature, wind is really one of the most important factors when it comes to determining how much water is lost to evaporation from our reservoirs. Because not only do you need the capacity of the air to hold the water, you need the saturated air to move on. That way you can get fresh, drier air in to evaporate more water. Okay. And that's what we say, it preserves what's called a concentration gradient. Once the air becomes highly concentrated in water vapor, you typically have evaporation slow down because there's not a lot of room for any more water to go. Right. Once the wind blows that air away, you get drier air in. Now you have a concentration gradient where there's plenty of room now in the air right above the reservoir to accommodate more evaporation and more water. So lake evaporation is really driven by two things, temperature and wind. And it can be quite substantial, especially from a water supply perspective. It's an important component of how we monitor our reservoir supply. This graphic here is actually, it's a portion of another graphic we make, our annual water use graphic that we put out every year. What I've done here is zoomed into a very small piece of it and simplified it for the purposes of this presentation. These bars, sets of bars, are represented for each one of the reservoirs in our water supply system. The blue represents inflows into the reservoir, the water's flowing in. The orange represents what we have to release from the reservoirs to maintain reservoir levels during flood times. You can see for this year, 2022, it was a pretty dry year, so inflows were kind of low and flood releases were kind of low. Right. But water use, the red, was pretty high. and evaporation was pretty high. And I want to point out for water use, I've labeled it here as conservation pool use, right? The conservation pools of these reservoirs, that's what stores the water we use for a great variety of things. Not just for water supply, some of it's for electricity generation, some of it's passed through for downstream senior water right holders. But I pointed out here, of all these red bars, if you added them all up, about 380,000 acre feet of water was used for water supply back in 2022. And what I want to point out is across the entire system, over 500,000 acre feet of water evaporated from the system. So in that year across the entire system, evaporation was our greatest user of water when you compare to water supply uses.
So as people watched the lake levels declined, it was really declining more because it was evaporating than it was being used.
It's a case by case basis. If you'll notice here, some of these bars, like for our large reservoirs, Possum Kingdom, Lake Whitney, Lake Belton, Lake Limestone, you can see that the yellow bar is actually larger, has more area than the red bar. So if you're at Whitney and PK and you're seeing the lake level decline, on any given day, that decline might proportionally be caused more by evaporation than by actual water usage. Take a reservoir like Georgetown or even Granbury, the opposite may be true. Those reservoirs, because they have higher local uses, you may see the reservoir decline more due to water use rather than evaporation. You have to consider the size of the reservoir itself. Lake Georgetown is a tiny little thing. There's not a lot of surface area for air to be on top of to evaporate it.
Right.
Look at PK, much, much larger, much more air. It's also a little bit windy up in North Texas, right? So you get a lot more evaporation peeling that water off the surface of the lake for sure. All right, so back to the water cycle. There's another important component here when it comes to how we consider, and I mentioned this before, how we kind of evaluate water supply as we move through the seasons. And that is the relationship between our lakes and soils, our vegetation communities, and runoff, right? And I mentioned before, runoff is key when it comes to refilling our reservoirs, all right? Reservoirs generally aren't large enough to where if it rains on them, that refills them, right? It rains, you know, a lot of rain might be a 3 or 4 inch rain event. That might be a lot of rain for your yard, but that's not a lot of rain for a reservoir if it's multiple feet low. So what we need is for it to rain over vast swaths of the basin and for that rain to generate runoff and that runoff to go into our rivers and then into our reservoirs. The thing is, you can't get runoff until you've accounted for what goes into your soils and what the plants can take up. All right, and collectively, when you have water being lost from soils, it's one of two mechanisms. It's either evaporation, where the water is directly evaporated from the soil, just like it is from a lake, but it's actually being evaporated from the pore space in the soil material, or it's transpiration. And that's where the plants are sucking in the water through their roots, using that water as part of their everyday cycle of life and evaporating it out of the leaves, right? And so if you combine these two mechanisms, evaporation and transpiration, you get the $10 word, evapotranspiration. The important thing is, as we move into the spring, we have a lot of vegetative communities that become active, right? So when it rains in the winter, a lot of that moisture can stay in the soil because the plants simply aren't using it. Some gets evaporated, but again, temperatures are fairly low in the winter, so the air doesn't have a great capacity to evaporate. But once spring has sprung, air starts to warm, you get more soil evaporation. Plants start to wake up, you get more transpiration. And so during the spring, even though generally it rains more in the spring, it has to rain more to generate runoff because the soils and the plants are taking more of it and more is lost from the soil because of evapotranspiration.
So we've had people ask us, you know, hey, it rained 3 inches at Lake Granbury, but it looks like the lake is going down. And that's because it's basically feeding that soil before it can run off.
And so, you know, if you have dry conditions in the basin ahead of a rainfall event, even if it rains 1, 2, or 3 inches, you may not generate a comparatively high runoff volume because you're having to replenish what was lost from the soil. And the amount that's lost from the soil increases as we move into spring and into summer because more is being evaporated and more is being transpirated. The good thing about spring is we get sequences of rainfall events. And so that's the big winning thing we look for is because we have plants consuming soil moisture, because we have soil moisture evaporating, what we really want to see out of a rainfall event is sequencing. Early in the spring, you need rainfall events to replenish the soils, get the soils wet. That way, the next time it rains, hopefully it rains again soon after, less of that rainfall will have room to be stored in the soil, which means more of it will run off into the rivers and refill our reservoirs.
Right.
And so that's the key with precipitation. It's not enough that it rains. It needs to rain in great enough magnitudes over large enough areas and in sufficient sequences to where we overcome all of the other environmental elements that consume that water in the soils and allow that water to enter our waterways to become heavy enough flows to actually see meaningful rises in our reservoirs.
Okay. I know that's a lot of science for a lot of people, but at the same time, it explains a little bit about why so many people ask the question, hey, it rains so much, but I'm not seeing anything in the lake, or the creeks aren't running dry. And it's basically because you have to saturate that soil first.
Right.
Before it can run off and move into our creeks and rivers and then the reservoirs. So I hope that explained it for everybody. I know that was a lot of science, but we're going to talk a little bit more about water supply and what we were doing as far as weather goes for this coming spring and summer with Aaron Abel. So Peyton, thank you very much for coming and talking to us about this. And if you all have questions about this whole hydrologic cycle, water cycle, please send us an email or ask us a question now, and we'll see if we can get to it before the end of our program. So thank you again. Our next guest is Aaron Abel. Oh, before we head in that, let me do a real quick little commercial here. So many people have said to us, you know, we don't really know how to let our children know about the water cycle or things like water and wastewater treatment. And we're trying to help a little bit with that by providing coloring books for your children and grandchildren to help you teach them a little bit about how our system works, everything from conserving water to how water is treated to how wastewater is treated. And if you have any topic that involves water that you'd like to learn about, please send us an email at information@brazos.org with your name and your postal address, and we will send you coloring books to help you teach your kids about water so that our future generations know a little bit more about how our water works and how we provide that water to Texas. So with that in mind, let's go to Aaron Abel. He's going to tell us a little bit about what we can expect for the weather this spring and summer, and whether or not we're going to have a drought or whether or not we're going to have a lot of water supply available.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, Judy.
We're happy to have you back.
Yeah, we'll kind of run through kind of the status of the system as it is now. We'll talk a little bit about what we've seen here recently as far as rainfall, and then departure from normal rainfall. So we can look at that, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about maybe what's ahead. We are in spring. We've had some rain. There's a lot of spring left, so we'll see what happens. But here, everybody, you can see our BRA water supply system and our status. And obviously we update this every Wednesday. The thing that you'll see differently is you'll notice some colors surrounding some reservoirs. So that has to do with our recent entrance into stage 1 drought watch at Stillhouse Hollow, Lake Georgetown, and Lake Somerville. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but wanted to point out, obviously we still have the data in the upper right hand. So you'll see the percent full 2-week change. We've seen some improvements as far as the 2-week change in both lake levels and obviously capacity in some of our reservoirs. And then obviously the height of the column is representative and proportional to the actual capacity of each reservoir. So
we're seeing a lot of blue right now.
We're seeing a lot of blue.
Good.
Yeah. And we've actually, right now we're at 94% full, and we've actually been about 93 to 94% full since mid-November. And so, Peyton just talked about the hydrologic cycle. In winter, we don't see much change in our lake levels because the weather is cool. We don't see much water use. We don't see much evaporation, and we don't see much rainfall.
Yeah, people aren't using their sprinkler systems and such during the winter months, so it's not, the water use is down.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we have entered into stage 1 drought watch at those 3 reservoirs, and we entered into stage 1 relative to a metric called the Palmer Hydrologic Drought Index. And that is a metric that we instituted in our drought contingency plan. I don't know, it's probably been about 10 years or so, and we use it as an early drought warning trigger. The Palmer Hydrologic Drought Index measures the cumulative moisture supply in an area. And so when you talk about water supply impacts to drought, you're talking about reservoir levels, stream flow, groundwater levels, such as that. Now, when we have drought conditions, those metrics really don't change for a while. So it takes a longer amount of time to really see those changes. So in this metric, that's what we're kind of representing is, okay, here is a metric that can give us a handle on where are the areas that are starting to see these longer term drought impacts. Now the lake levels in those 3 reservoirs are still doing pretty well, but they are below full.
So we're seeing some white.
We're seeing some empty storage. So
Okay.
yeah, the blue is full storage, and the white in those columns are empty storage. So we went into stage 1 because of the Palmer Hydrologic Drought Index. The index itself, the more positive it is the wetter it is. Now, if you get into negative numbers, it's drier. So our metric is when those areas reach negative 2.4, and we monitor that on a monthly basis, that's a metric to go into stage 1 drought watch. Now, stage 1 is a 5% reduction in water use. It's really to, out there to bring awareness to drought in those areas. So
for these 3 reservoirs, we've notified them,
right,
the people that take water from these reservoirs, that we're going into the beginning of drought notices.
yes.
So stage 1 drought watch.
Yes, and that happened in the last 10 days or so, towards the early part of this month, and I think there was a press release that we issued, and then obviously notification of our customers. So that's kind of where we are in terms of our water supply. Now we'll kind of transition to what we've seen here recently on observed precipitation, and this is National Weather Service information. Pretty colors. The basin is outlined, obviously the basin boundary, and then our reservoirs are located in the circles, the white circles, and labeled. The legend on the left is rainfall over the last 14 days, so the last 2 weeks, and you'll see, most everybody got some rain in the last 2 weeks. Last week and the week before, we had some, pretty decent rainfall events. Most areas, received 1 to 3 inches. Some areas upstream of Possum Kingdom received, 3 to 4 inches in areas north of Abilene. And then areas around Lake Whitney, you'll see, received anywhere from 4 to 5 inches locally. And so, but most areas kind of really received about 1 to 2 inches over most of the basin. So, we have seen some rain. It is spring. There is, as Peyton mentioned, the vegetation is active, so that is working towards sucking up some of the rainfall and the runoff. So, that's a factor to some degree. Now we'll talk a little bit about what we've seen over the last 30 days, last month, in terms of are we above or below relative to what we normally get. So this is what we call the 30-day departure from normal precipitation. Again, this is information from the National Weather Service. The warmer colors, the yellows, represent below normal precipitation for roughly March 7th to April 7th, so that most of March. And then the cooler colors, the blues and the purples and the pinks, you'll see off to the northeast, that's above normal precipitation. So even though we've seen some rain over the last 2 weeks, a lot of areas, especially in parts of the upper basin, really from PK downstream, have really seen below normal rainfall in March. And we typically don't get as much rain in March as we do in April through June. That's where we received the bulk of our rainfall, but, we didn't receive as much as we normally do. So that's something to think about and monitor. Now, we can also look back 4 months. So this is the 120-day departure from normal. Again, you'll see the cooler colors represent above normal precipitation, and then the warmer below normal. So, this spans back to the early part of December. So from December 7th to April 7th, that 120-day period, a lot of the basin really is below normal as far as precipitation.
So that red really
red-
indicates where we need more
Absolutely.
rainfall.
In some areas of McLennan County, Coryell, parts of Falls, into Limestone, and then really around Bryan College Station, that localized area, they're almost 5 to 8 inches below normal for the last 120 days. So it's interesting. Typically, our reservoirs to the south, closer to the coast, central and lower part of the basin, we receive more rainfall than we do, in the upper basin, say PK and Granbury. But really, right now, it's kind of flipped. PK and Granbury are in good condition, or almost full or very near full, and others reservoirs in the central and lower part of the basin are less than full. So, but I will say and we'll talk a little bit about why we haven't seen as much rain over the last 120 days. But again, we are still really early. Spring just sprung, and
No reason to be alarmed just yet.
Right. But we are continuing to monitor things. So I think I showed this graphic in the last brown bag, and there's a lot of talk about El Nino and La Nina, and I won't go into great detail, but La Nina basically means below normal temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. And so this is a map of really the world, and it's depicting the sea surface temperature anomaly. So there's buoys out there that monitor the sea surface temperatures and at different depths all over the world. And so that is one thing that we look at in terms of, is there El Nino or La Nina? La Nina means below normal, and that typically means drier weather for us, particularly in the winter. El Nino is above normal temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, and we typically get above normal rainfall. So in February, this was early February, we did have a La Nina advisory in place, and typically when we have La Nina conditions, we don't see as much rainfall in the winter, and that's kind of what we saw for the most part. Now, if we fast forward to now, this is the same graphic data source from National Weather Service, and we're still seeing some cooler temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, but it is lessening. And all indications and all the experts, concerning El Nino, La Nina, and this global circulation says that we will transition to a neutral position or a neutral status
So what
next
does
month.
neutral mean?
Neutral means, I'm not sure what that means.
Okay.
We don't know really we can
Right.
we can continue to have dry conditions, or we continue to have
It could go either way.
we could go either way.
Okay.
Now, I will say that the outlook, so this is another graphic that we show at each brown bag, and this is updated by NOAA, typically the third week of each month. So this is a March 20th rendition of what the seasonal temperature outlook will be and the precipitation outlook for April through June. And, from a temperature standpoint, above normal, and it's for the precipitation standpoint, it is shading below normal for those 3 months. I will say this is a long-term outlook. So if you break up the months within those 3 months, we could have, flood events within that 3-month period and still be, below normal. So this is something that we just look at, and we can draw some conclusions, but for the most part, it's something just to watch out for, and potentially, monitor rainfall and what we may see in the next 3 months. So again, but in the near term, even in the next 10 days to 14 days, there are some indications that we will see some wetter weather again, like we had earlier this month. The U.S. seasonal drought outlook, it is tending to mirror what the precipitation outlook is, as far as drought persistence in this part of the basin and this part of Texas. And then also in the yellow, which indicates drought development likely in some of the areas that are maybe not in drought now could move into drought. So again, this is something to just monitor, and these change quite frequently. And this was updated March 31st, and they typically have multiple updates through the month. So, rain events can change this.
This brown does not mean that we need to panic that lake levels
Right.
are going to drop 3 or 4 feet. It just means
No.
that it looks like it may be drier than usual, but it could
Yes.
change at any point.
Yes, and this drought depiction, that doesn't necessarily mean water supply impacts. There's other parts of the system where we have drought impacts, like agricultural cropland, pasture land. That those kind of areas see impacts to drought before we do, and
Right.
that's kind of what we're seeing here is if we continue to see below normal rainfall, then those types of issues will pop up. And again, hydrologic impacts they're really the last to go into drought, and then they're the last to come out of drought. So,
Okay.
and I think that's really all we had. It's spring is here, and there's a lot of spring left, and
Right.
a lot of opportunity for rainfall. Hopefully, we'll receive some rainfall and
And won't have to worry about whether or not lake levels will
Right.
begin to drop. Okay. Well, it is our busy season of the year when we have the most rainfall, and we could go anywhere from having some flood operations to actually going further into drought, not just the 3 reservoirs that are currently listed in the Palmer Drought Index. So, well, thank you, Erin, very much for coming and telling us about it. We will have another brown bag in another month and a half and take a look at where we may be going for the rest of the summer. So I don't see that we have any questions today. But we're happy if you decide to watch this presentation again on YouTube, which it should be there later on this afternoon. You might have some additional questions. If you do, please feel free to send us an email at information@brazos.org, and we're happy to answer those questions for you. And again, if you're interested in helping your kids or grandkids learn a little bit more about water, the water industry, conservation, what happens during stormwater events, just send us a little request at information@brazos.org, and we'd be happy to put those in the mail for you. So until next time, thank you very much for joining us for the brown bag, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day.